The term Middle English literature refers to the literature written in the form of the English language known as Middle English, from the 12th century until the 1470s. During this time the Chancery Standard, a form of London-based English, became widespread and the printing press regularized the language. Between the 1470s and the middle of the following century there was a transition to early modern English. In literary terms, the characteristics of the literary works written did not change radically until the effects of the Renaissance and Reformed Christianity became more apparent in the reign of King Henry VIII. There are three main categories of Middle English literature: religious, courtly love, and Arthurian, though much of Geoffrey Chaucer's work stands outside these. Among the many religious works are those in the Katherine Group and the writings of Julian of Norwich and Richard Rolle. After the Norman conquest of England, law French became the standard language of courts, parliament, and society. The Norman dialects of the ruling classes mixed with the Anglo-Saxon of the people and became Anglo-Norman, and Anglo-Saxon underwent a gradual transition into Middle English. Around the turn of the 13th century, laymen wrote in Middle English. Other transitional works were popular entertainment, including a variety of romances and lyrics. With time, the English language regained prestige, and in 1362 it replaced French and Latin in Parliament and courts of law. Early examples of Middle English literature are the Ormulum and Havelock the Dane. In the 14th century major works of English literature began once again to appear, including the works of Chaucer. The latter portion of the 14th century also saw not only the consolidation of English as a written language and a shift to secular writing. William Caxton printed 4/5 of his works in English, which helped to standardize the language and expand the vocabulary. Early period, after the Norman conquest of England, the written form of the Anglo-Saxon language continued in some monasteries, but few literary works are known from this period. Under the influence of the new aristocracy, law French became the standard language of courts, parliament, and polite society. As the invaders integrated, their language and literature mingled with that of the natives. The Norman dialects of the ruling classes became Anglo-Norman, and Anglo-Saxon underwent a gradual transition into Middle English. Political power was no longer in English hands, so the West Saxon literary language had no more influence than any other dialect. Middle English literature is written, then, in the many dialects that correspond to the history, culture, and background of the individual writers. While Anglo-Norman or Latin was preferred for high culture and administration, English literature by no means died out, and a number of important works illustrate the development of the language. Around the turn of the 13th century, Layman wrote his Brut, based on Whig's 12th century Anglo-Norman epic of the same name. Layman's language is recognizably Middle English, though his prosody shows a strong Anglo-Saxon influence remaining. Other transitional works were preserved as popular entertainment, including a variety of romances and lyrics. With time, the English language regained prestige, and in 1362 it replaced French and Latin in Parliament and courts of law. Early examples of Middle English literature are the Ormulum and Havelock the Dane. The Mercian dialect thrived between the 8th and 13th centuries and was referred to by John Treviser, writing in 1387. For men of the East with men of the West, as it were under the same party of heaven, accordeth more in so ninge of spech than men of the North with men of the South, therefore it is that Merciae, that beeth men of Middle Engelond, as it were partners of the ends, understandeth better the side languages, Northern and Southern, than Northern and Southern understandeth either a fairer Euro. Late period, it was with the 14th century that major works of English literature began once again to appear. These include the so-called Pearl poets Pearl, Patience, Clearness, and Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. Langland's political and religious allegory Piers Plowman. John Gower's Confessio Amantes. And the works of Geoffrey Chaucer, the most highly regarded English poet of the Middle Ages, who was seen by his contemporaries as an English successor to the great tradition of Virgil and Dante. The latter portion of the 14th century also saw not only the consolidation of English as a written language, taking over from French or Latin in certain areas, but a large shift from primarily theological or religious subject matter to also include that of a more secular nature. Vernacular book production saw a growth in the amount of books being copied, both secular and religious. Thus, the latter portion of the 14th century can be seen as one of the most significant periods in the history of the English language. The reputation of Chaucer's successors in the 15th century has suffered in comparison with him, though Lygate, Thomas Hoccleve, and Skelton are widely studied. At this time the origins of Scottish poetry began with the writing of the Kinge Square by James I of Scotland. The main poets of this Scottish group were Robert Henryson, William Dunbar, and Gavin Douglas. Henryson and Douglas introduced a note of almost savage satire, which may have owed something to the Gaelic bardic poetry, while Douglas's version of Virgil's Aeneid is one of the early monuments of Renaissance literary humanism in English. It was a vibrant time for religious drama as well. Many morality plays and miracle plays were produced, and some scripts survive today. Sidrach and Bacchus is another example of late Middle English literature. Caxton in the English language. The first English printer, William Caxton, printed 4/5 of his works in English. He translated a large number of works into English. Caxton translated 26 of the titles himself. Caxton is credited with printing as many as 108 books, 87 of which were different titles. However, the English language was changing rapidly in Caxton's time and the works he was given to print were in a variety of styles and dialects. Caxton was a technician rather than a writer and he often faced dilemmas concerning language standardization in the books he printed. His successor Wynkyn faced similar problems. Caxton is credited with standardizing the English language through printing. This facilitated the expansion of English vocabulary, the development of inflection and syntax and the ever-widening gap between the spoken and the written word. However, Richard Pinson, a Frenchman who started printing in London in 1491 or 1492 and who favoured Chancery Standard English, was a more accomplished stylist and consequently pushed the English language even further towards standardization. See also, Scott's Macas, English Mystery Plays. References. Further reading, Kaiser, Rolf, ed. Medieval English, An Old English and Middle English Anthology. 3rd ed. Berlin, Rolf Kaiser.